as the entire Southeast. So I do a lot of accounts other than Publix, but Publix is the main one. And and the reason I'm here today is to give you guys a quick course on Dixell case controllers. So it's kind of a new product for CPC. Dixell is actually an Italian company that Emerson purchased a few years ago. The product's actually been out for several years, so it's not a new product. It's actually a pretty tried and true product, but the integration to E2 is new. So we actually bought Dixell and integrated it into the E2 software. So like I said, that integration to E2 is actually what's new to us. The Dixell controllers themselves is a pretty solid controller. So anyway, I'll get into case controls overall. Publix has decided to go back to using case controls on new stores. So that's kind of where a lot of this is coming from. And the reason they're doing that is the energy efficiency of an electronic expansion valve. So the case controllers kind of enable that use of an electronic expansion valve. So it really gives a lot of energy efficiency, which is the main reason Publix likes it. One of the things for you guys is it actually helps reduce your startup time too, because now you're not setting superheat on 70, 80 cases in a store at startup. This thing controls your superheat. So I've had guys tell me that'll cut 3 or 4 days of your startup out. So something, and it also helps too with serviceability. You're not always having to check superheat and things like that. So it pretty much takes that out of the mix. So, that's something that I think will help you guys out. Why Dixell? So I know you guys are you've probably seen the old CCBs, maybe even go back to some of the old rifle cases that CPC made, and then CCBs went away and we brought out CC100. CC100 is about a 15-year-old product. It's the electronics are pretty old in it, and as in electronics world, that's a dinosaur pretty much. So CC100 will be going away this year. This year at some point, I don't know exactly when, but we'll see the end of life of CC100. So Dixell will be the replacement across the board. We've kind of been phasing it into Publix in small doses, remodels here and there. Just to kind of try to get people's feet wet and used to it. But the Dixell platform is a far more sustainable platform for electronics. CC100 and CCB both were a CPC product, and all the electronics that went into it, we were actually very low volume as far as the chips and stuff. So we didn't have a lot of buying power. We didn't have a lot of clout with these electronic suppliers to say, hey, keep making these chips for us even though they're 20 years old. They just say, your volume's not high enough, we're not making it anymore. So that's kind of why we end up end of lifing some of these case controllers. With Dixell, that's not as much of a problem. Because it's actually a global product. It's sold in Australia, Asia, the UK, all over the world. So it's a very high volume product. The way Dixell has made is the electronics that go into this particular device may go into multiple other devices as well. And then the actual program that you use or the interface will be different, but the electronics are the same. So it's a far more sustainable platform to take us in the future. So hopefully in 10 years, I'm not standing up here saying, oh, Dixell's end of life. I can't guarantee that, but I think we're poised to carry this for a lot longer period of time. One of the issues with case controllers is every time we come out with a new case controller, we change the network. I know that's a big pain in the butt. It's certainly a pain in our butt too. CCB had the I/O network, and the problem with that was we were running out of addresses. So there's only 256 devices you can address on an I/O net, and with all the different boards that we have, we had basically just run out of addresses. So when they came out with CC100, they put it on the Echelon network. At that particular time, Echelon was was popular and a lot of people were using it, so that's why they adopted Echelon. Well, that's that's pretty much gone away. We learned a lot of lessons about Echelon. I'm not a big fan of it. It's a very complicated network. So when we come out with this one, it works on a Modbus network. So here we are, third case controller, third different type network. But the Modbus network is very similar to an IO net. It uses the same cable. So it's, it's not like the Echelon had a specific cable that you had to use. Modbus is not that way. It's RS-485 based. So it's not, it's not a special cable. But one of the things too to remember is the polarity on a Modbus network. Anytime you're on a Modbus network and you connect it to E2, the polarity gets reversed. And the reason for that is we had a developer early on at CPC that thought that that the networks were backwards in the way that they had the polarity. So he decided that, hey, we're going to do it this way. Well, when we started, and it was fine when we had all of our controls, our own case controls, our own boards, all that stuff. When we started getting into integrating products that used the same protocols on the network, it became an issue, and we had to reverse the polarity. So that's why it's just it's an idiosyncrasy of CPC. But anyway, so whatever you connect on the positive at the device at the E2, you just have to reverse it. That goes to negative. So, and you guys should have. You've probably seen some Dixell devices already in some of the new stores on the chiller controller. The chiller expansion valve is a Dixell product. It's actually a superheat controller, XEV 30 or XEV 22. It'd be the same way. The polarity there is reversed. So, but that's, like I said, that's just one thing to keep in mind. Now, also, Dixell. This is, like I said, this is the one that Publix is using, and I don't know if you can see this on the webcam, but let me see if I can get it over here. I think you guys have probably all seen these. These are the XM679 case controls. What an XM679 is it's a pulse valve case controller. So the electronic expansion valve that it controls is a pulse valve. We also have a 678 version that would control a stepper valve. Publix likes the pulse valve because the positive shut off in case of power failure. So with a stepper valve, you actually have to incorporate a liquid line solenoid valve along with it in order to shut off the flow in case of power failure to keep from flooding your rack out. So pulse valve is positive shut off. Let's see here. I'm talking too much. So the way a pulse valve works is it actually has an interval. So a pulse valve is either open or closed. Like a stepper valve has multiple positions, and it can be, anywhere from 0 to 100% open. A pulse valve is technically either open or closed, but the way that this thing works is you're going to see a valve percentage, and you're going to say, well, how, if I have a 50% valve percentage, how does that work with a valve that's either open or closed? And the way that works is there's a time period that a pulse valve works. So with the case of this XM679 controller, that time period is 6 seconds. So over the course of that 6 seconds, if you're at 50% valve capacity, it's going to be open for 3 seconds and closed for 3 seconds. If it's at 100%, it's going to be open for the entire 6 seconds. If it's at 0%, it's going to be closed for the entire 6 seconds. So that's what the valve percentage stands for. That's what that means. So.
Is that a different rate than the CCBs used to pulse at?
I don't really know what rate the CCBs pulsed at, and it's actually you can actually change what that time period is. There's a setting in the E2 that you can change it, but I wouldn't suggest changing it. I mean, the 6 seconds is pretty much a pretty good time spot. Digital compressors work the same way. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, I'm sure you probably are familiar with digital compressors, but they work the same way. It's over I think those operate on a 20-second window. But with the pulse valve, we need a lot tighter window, so it's always changing percentage, so we change it every 6 seconds. So, the XM case controllers, when they ship to Hill Phoenix, or if you guys are doing a retrofit and they come to you guys, they have a set of base parameters that reside in the device. Those parameters won't work. And this is the most important part of this whole training thing, is the parameters that reside in the device when it comes to you are a universal set of parameters that may work in Australia, may work in Asia. They don't work here. So that's a problem. We're working on that. We're trying to get a specific controller sent to the U.S. that has our parameters loaded into it. So with that being said, there's 2 ways to get the right parameters in there. One of them is called a hotkey, and I brought some hotkeys here. It's basically a memory stick, and it only fits these controllers. So that's a hotkey, and it fits in, and you can dump the parameters down into it. Now the problem is you have to put parameters on this, because whenever this comes from us, it's blank. So you have to have a controller to get the parameters out of. So if you've already done a couple of stores, like I think you guys have 553. If you had another store and you wanted to get the parameters out of it, you could take these hotkeys, you could go load it into that device, and you could load all the parameters onto here. I know a lot of contractors that are doing it that way, and they have these hotkeys with the parameters loaded. But if you're on a new store or a remodel, and you have your network up, and you already have all your network ran to the XM controllers, you can dump all the parameters into it from the E2, and that's the way I suggest doing it. So if you're on a remodel and you're going to be doing a couple cases a night, I would push your coordinators very hard to have the network up and running, or at least available to you, so that whenever you put these cases on, that you've got the network there and you can talk to them over the E2. It's a lot simpler to talk to that device through the E2. So to have that network there is crucial. So I've done a lot of these stores, and just about every one of them we've had the network online when we did the case changeouts.
But don't you have to link every one case controller by case controller? But with the E2, you wouldn't have to do every one. Like if it has one case controller, say 1, you have to tell the E2 1 so they can interface.
Yes.
But with the key, you can do them all at the same time.
Well, so what it does is this the XM device has, I think, 299 parameters in it. The E2, what we did with the E2 is we tried to keep it the same as we did for CCB and CC100. So you actually have your XM device, which is a network piece, and then you have your XM circuit. And the XM circuit has all of your set points, your defrost settings, all that type stuff. So those two combined, the device and the circuit, actually create those 299 parameters that reside in there. The reason we had the circuit is if you had 3 cases that were on a circuit, the way that would be set up, you'd have one XM circuit, but you'd have 3 XM devices. You don't want to have to go into each one of those devices and set your set point or your defrost, because it's the same for all 3. So it doesn't make sense to go into 3 different places and set that up. So we have the XM circuit that kind of overrides, and it pushes it down to all 3 of those devices. Now with the way Publix does it, they have one case is one circuit. So in Publix world, we have one XM circuit, one XM device, and that's it. So we don't have.
It was a system that had an A and B system. You can just use one controller for the A and B system, just as long as you have
No, if you had an A/B system, you would have to have an XM device for A and an XM device for B.
So the same thing, one controller per system.
Right.
Per
Yes.
case.
One controller per case, right. And then you would have one XM circuit that kind of was a supervisory level for both devices, the A and the B. And we'll get into that when I'll show you guys how to associate the device to the circuit.
So the way the Publix is doing it is a lot easier because they're just doing one at a time.
Yeah, I think so. It kind of, the way Publix does it, technically, we probably wouldn't have to have an XM device and an XM circuit, but technically you could put everything into the device itself. But to keep it the same way we did all the other case controllers, we set them up that way. And Publix is not the only person that's using it. So most other customers, they'll actually have multiple cases on one circuit. Luckily, Publix doesn't. I think it makes it a lot easier when you have one case to one circuit. So I like the way Publix does it. So anyway, if we have our network up and running, then the E2 has got default parameters for the XM device that will work, that will run a case circuit out of the box. So I always like to take the E2 parameters and push them down into the device. So that's why it's important to have that network up and running on a remodel so that you can do that. You can rely on the hotkeys, but I think it's a lot easier to troubleshoot. It's a lot easier to tell what's going on if you're working from the E2. Working from the Dixell device, I mean, you have this little display here. Let's see if I can get this on camera. You have this display with 3 digits on it, and everything's coded. So it's very difficult to troubleshoot from here. You don't know what the abbreviations mean. If you go to E2, they're all identified. So I would highly suggest troubleshooting through the E2, not trying to troubleshoot from this device. It just doesn't make sense. So again, to push the parameters from the E2 to the device is the way that we prefer to do it. It makes life a lot simpler for you guys. You can reuse the Ccb network if you're doing a case change out, and let's say you don't, they're not going to run a new network. I've seen people that have reused the same network that the CCBs use. So what you'd want to do in that case is when you've got 2 cases that are going in with Dixell and everything else on that loop is CCB, go through and unplug all your CCBs and use that loop, that network loop for your new Dixell devices. Don't forget to reverse your polarity at the E2. Anyway, you can do it that way. So have your CCBs running standalone until you get eventually you would get them all out. But if you're still going to use some of those CCBs, you have to run a new network. So I'd only reuse the CCB network if everything on that loop is going to change to Dixell. If you still got cases that are going to be on CCB, some on Dixell, you'll have to run a new network. So.
Question.
Yes, sir.
A lot of the old CCB stores, because the cases ran 2 loops, we were using the RS-232, COM A and COM B, I believe it was.
Okay.
If I had to add Dixells and leave CCBs, how do you add a loop, or do you go to the end of the COM and then add your Dixell?
Well, so they can't be on the same loop. So I can't have Dixells and CCBs on the same one. So what I was saying, you can reuse that CCB network if everything on that network is going to Dixell. You can reuse that cable, I should say. But you can't mix CCB and Dixell on the same network loop. They will, because they have different protocols. So the old CCB's on IONet, the new Dixell's on Modbus. So they won't both talk on the same network. If you're going to have both, you would have to leave. You'd have to run a new network for the Dixell. Yes, sir.
I know over at 553, we just made like rack 1 had its own loop, and rack 2 had its own loop.
Yes.
and then on the board inside the E2, that's where we connect them.
Right, that's correct. So yeah, we and if you have, I think 553 was a little different because they had 2 racks per controller, and
Right.
they were old legacy E2s.
And they're putting the new controllers in because they're too slow.
Right, yeah, and that's the thing. So most case-controlled stores have 1 rack, 1 controller, and you know they're putting new controllers in that store because the E2E, the enhanced version, has faster processor, more memory capability. So in that particular instance, I think E2E is probably a better fit. But you can put Dixell on a legacy E2. You just have to have the COM card for the Modbus. You guys are probably familiar with that COM card with Linux. It's the same. It's on an E2 controller. It just adds a 485 network, and so we can use that 485 network for the Modbus. I'm gonna leave that there for the time being. One other thing too, with pulse valves, you have a coil voltage with the pulse valves, and if you get new cases from CP or new cases from Hill Phoenix, they're probably going to come with 120 volt solenoid coils. That's the way most of them are coming. I double check them just to make sure they're 120. I've seen them put 208 volt coils or 24 volt coils, but they're all wired for 120 volt. And that's the way the XM679 is set up, is for 120 volt coils. Now, if you're doing a retrofit, the old CCBs, I think, were using 24 volt pulse valve solenoid coils. So if you're retrofitting an old CCB with a Dixell, the Dixell will control a 24 volt, but there's a jumper that you got to set. And the jumper is under this box. I'm not going to take it off, but you just pop off the cover of the Dixell, and there's a jumper. It's actually even noted on the front cover, but there's a jumper that you can move to where it'll control a 24 volt pulse valve. So anyway, if you're doing a retrofit, that's really important to know that jumper's there.
It's almost like the Dan Frost setup.
I'm sorry?
That would be like the Dan Frost setup, too.
Yes.
It almost looks like it.
Yeah, I'm saying.
So, but yeah, that's and a lot of people don't know that jumper's there. So I'm gonna make sure everybody knows it's there. It's set for 120 volt because like I said, that's what all the new cases are coming with. But usually the remodels will have a 24 volt coil, so you have to set that jumper if you're doing a retrofit. All right, too. One of the things we'll talk about too are our probe IDs. So the Dixell identifies probes in the controller as P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P6. That doesn't mean anything. So I'm going to identify what these stand for. And it's actually also in this sheet on one of the wiring diagrams in the back. I think it's the one for the walk-ins. So this diagram for the walk-ins, it's got down below, it's got all the coil or all of the inputs, and so the discharge air is probe P1 or PB1, some say. And so in the E2, when you're going through setups in the E2, you'll see the probes are identified P1, P2. So like I said, that's why I want to draw attention to this. P1 is always your discharge air. P2 is always your defrost termination. We don't use probe 3 and 4, so we can just skip over those. P5 is the suction transducer for measuring the superheat, and P6 is your coil out. So that's your suction line temp on P6. One thing with Dixell, it measures superheat by pressure and temperature. So the old CCB, CC100s was temp in, temp out. Dixells are pressure, suction temp. So it reads a true superheat.
Those transducers use a CPC one?
Yep, standard CPC transducer. All the same sensors that we use on CCB, CC100. It's all we still use the same sensors: the green, the orange, and the blue. Yeah. So.
Is there any way that we can get the little clips? Because the clips that you guys have on are different.
Yes. So you are right. So a lot of the a lot of the temp probes off of the old case controllers.
That we carry on our trucks aren't the same sensors that
Yeah. So they had Molex connectors on the CC 100s. With the Dixells, actually, what you have is a Phoenix connector. So you can cut the Molex connectors off and feed it into the Phoenix connector. So this is what goes on the Dixell Phoenix connector. You just plug the wires into here.
And also the little copper loops too that hold them to the suction.
You can use
Oh,
regular
yeah.
CPC sensors.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the connectors to hold it.
The regular ones that we have on our truck are bigger than the ones that.
Right, so you'd have to use a different strap.
So we just have to strap them with the TSV strap.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know I guess the ones that we send aren't big enough. Is that what you're saying?
But
No,
So we're gonna still get the molded
also,
sensors that mold around the pipe.
NPR,
Okay.
Yeah, the
I
little
got you.
clamp that holds
quarter-inch
it.
fitting.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
It's smaller actually.
Right. So. But yeah, that's one of the things too that I'm working with Publix on is on retrofits. As of right now, Dixell's it's not the best opportunity for a retrofit because if you were taking an old CCB out or a CC100 that failed, and say 10 years from now CC100 fails and we don't have replacements for those, which I fully anticipate that happening at some point. At this point, it's not a real good retrofit opportunity because we have to put a transducer in. Because right now it can't do coil in, coil out superheat. That is coming. We will have that in a release soon. I hope. I don't know. Emerson's a big company, so everything moves kind of slow. But we've been told it's been coming for a while. So at some point it will have the ability to coil in, coil out. So this will probably be a retrofit controller at that point. So. It also doesn't have a power module because all the relays on the Dixell device are rated for amperage. So Hill Phoenix is using pilot relays for the fan, the defrost, all those type outputs. But anyway, the power module is gone because on the CCBs and CC100s, the relays really weren't rated for 120 volt, 240 volt. They were low voltage relays. These are rated for voltage, so you can technically just run it right through here. But Hill Phoenix is putting pilot relays in just because it takes a lot of the voltage stress off of the Dixell controller. So it's a lot easier to replace a little pilot relay than it is to replace the controller. So if you take that voltage off of it, then it actually prolongs the life of it. So, yes, sir.
If they lock up, like the CCBs, like sometimes the case controller locks up, and then sometimes the valve locks up on the electronic valves. Same thing, just reset the board or reset the controller.
Yeah, you can actually reset the controller through the E2 as well. So I know you said you powered off the device.
I was thinking of the Carol, not the.
Oh yeah, I don't know anything about the Corel one. Sorry. You need to ask Hill Phoenix. Hit Jim Doc up for that with Hill Phoenix.
Because like on the other valves that we have, like your other Hill Phoenix cases that have the little green, yellow, the smart valves. So we're gonna do away with all the smart valves eventually.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I know you're talking about what they call the SMS.
Yes.
Yeah. At this point, I don't know that they have a plan in place to cut all the SMS out and replace them.
We already did that.
So I mean, yeah. If you guys I wouldn't blame you. They had a lot of problems with the SMS.
So then that would be pretty much eliminated.
You got a whole store of
Right.
Remember, you do one, you gotta do the other one to connect.
I know, right?
Yeah. So,
How much testing was involved with this Dixell? I know that because there's so much problem with the SMS. You guys tested it.
Well, Dixell is, I mean, this case controller has been out for several years. Like I said, it's used all over the world. So it's, I mean, it's pretty tried and true. Like I said, most of where we see issues is the interface with E2. So most of the problems that you're going to see maybe is the E2 maybe having some difficulty communicating with it, or syncing up. So that's really that's probably the most issues that I see. It happens occasionally. It can drive you. I mean, most of the time it's pretty seamless. But I've seen some issues where some things get out of sync, and and we'll go through some of the things to do to correct that. But the Dixell device itself is usually, I mean, it's pretty robust. So, yes, sir.
Can it be standalone?
It will. It'll operate in standalone as long as you have the parameters in there. So, like I said, if you start it out of the box without a hotkey or without a network, its standalone is not gonna work. But once you get the parameters in there, the parameters reside in that device, and it will run in standalone. Yeah. Sorry.
Are those internally protected in case of bad wiring, your load side and your communication side?
No.
I've seen them fried.
Okay,
yeah, if you got wires landed in the wrong place, it can fry them. Yeah, I've seen it. So before you put power to it, I'd verify all your connections. A lot of times I've even seen where like they'll land all the connections like one place off. Yeah. So I just
You see smoke coming up.
Yeah.
let all the magic smoke out.
That's it.
What's the availability of the controller?
Not good.
Oh, great answer.
We're working on it. It's if you called me up and said I need one, we've got them in an emergency. And Hill Phoenix carries them as well. If you wanted 50 of them, I need 5 weeks. But
We're supposed to have them in stock.
well, and that's what we're working on. I mean, and we keep them for we keep these in stock for emergency situations. Like I said, if we're doing a whole store change out and we need 50 of them, then I need 5 weeks. But if you got 1 or 2 that you need to replace, we keep those. So
I do that question. Considering we're like the surge capital of the world, are they surge protected? I mean, we have power outages every day,
right.
and we surge. When the generators kick on, are those protected, or do we have to externally protect them?
I don't know.
Any electronic device would not like to be surged, but
Yeah, but
I guess what he's trying to say is, do they have a tendency to lock up? Do you have to power them down to reset them?
I haven't. I mean, he was telling me that he had a fan that wouldn't come on after
Those are
defrost
different
and had to cycle power to
that's
it.
a different one.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as that, I haven't really seen them locking up where you needed to shut the power off. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but
Because
I don't believe it's like a high. It's not a high volume issue.
we did have an issue with the Danfoss when it first came out that they had to be
Oh, yeah, when I saw it.
protected.
Right.
Because they were down here
Sometimes just
frying the boards, locking out where you couldn't reset them.
I haven't heard of that issue. I mean, we've had a few. I mean, we've had some of them down in this area. There's, I think, a store in Jupiter, one of the Albertson stores in Jupiter. It's been up and running for a little over a year. I don't know if that's you guys' store or not.
That's the remodel.
13. I'm thinking what?
401.
1333. That's it. Jupiter. That one's been running for about a year. I mean, I guess you guys are servicing that. I haven't heard of issues there. But I don't know if they're having surge issues either. So, but yeah, I think that one's been online for about a year or so. One of the things too is, like I said, we've got 6 sensor inputs into this thing that I just went through them. The E2, whenever you take the parameters out of the E2 and you dump it into that device, it's got them all set up for CPC sensors. And one of the things though is it's going to send the parameters down for a CPC sensor on every one of those inputs. So in the case where we're not using the P3 and P4 inputs, what's going to happen is the E2 is going to generate an alarm because it's looking for a sensor there, because we're telling it has a CPC sensor there, but there's nothing connected to it, so it's going to alarm out. So we actually have to go in and disable those and tell the E2 that there's no probe in those locations. I'll show you how to do that too. It's real simple.
Are those probes loggable?
Yes, yeah, they're all. Yeah, we can log them, graph them.
Make them loggable.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I believe.
You just can't think, you have to go and
Yeah, you got to
make
change
each
it.
one loggable.
Right. So by default,
Not loggable.
I believe most of them are. Maybe not, but you may have to add them. So.
Well, that's what that older E2 though, right? That you guys have down there.
Right.
The newer E2 would have that already set up or not?
It may be in the firmware. I'm not sure what firmware. I think you were on 307 probably on that store, 'cause I think Steve upgraded it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may have to add. I was under the impression that. Well, let's look at it real quick, because I just added these last night. So, and I haven't added anything, but though I added valve percentage to the logging group. That valve percentage is something that does not default in the logging group. I would highly suggest adding valve percentage to your logging group. Let's see here.
Do these get, like on the stepper valves, they give an overcurrent alarm? Is there any alarm that would show that the valves ain't working properly, or?
Well, I mean, it's just a solenoid valve, so there's really, yeah, it's either giving it power or it's not. So, let's see here. All right, so the case temp is defaulted in the logging group, so that's your P1, your discharge air. It's defaulted. Superheat is defaulted for the logging group. Defrost termination is defaulted to the logging group. And let's see about the suction. And your pressure is defaulted to the logging group. So the only one that's not in the logging group is your coil out temp.
And it must have been the old controller, because we had to go back and, because we were trying to log.
Yeah, I think that controller was overloaded.
It's at 99%.
Yeah. So Steve may have went in and taken some stuff out of it because it was overloaded.
Right.
But yeah, you can add them to the logging group. So, but yeah, by default, most of them, with the exception of the coil out, are already in the logging group. So, one of the things too with the way that this thing works is it's actually running two separate algorithms all the time. So to control the expansion valve, it's looking at your case temp. That's its first priority is to make your case temp. And in the background, as it's looking at case temp, or as it's controlling the case temp, in the background, it's also looking at superheat. And if your superheat gets too low, it's going to shut the valve off. So if you, I think the default setting in here is 2 degrees superheat. When it hits that low superheat alarm of 2 degrees, regardless of where the case temp's at, it's going to shut the valve off. So it's running both, it's looking at both parameters at the same time. It's controlling to one, it's got the other one going on in the background. Now, when it reaches the case temperature set point, then what happens is then it goes to controlling superheat. So it's all right, my temperature is where it needs to be, now I'm going to control my superheat. So it kind of switches back and forth. Now what can happen in that scenario is if your valve's oversized and you meet your temperature set point and then it goes to superheat and it says, well, my superheat's too high, so I'm going to open the valve all the way up to get my superheat down. And what happens is your temperature drops. So then it says, well, my temperature's out of range, now I'm going to close the valve. And what happens is, if you look at a graph of your valve percentage, you're going 0 to 100, 0 to 100. So My 0 is when my case is at temperature or below temperature. The 100 is when saying my superheat's high. I'm trying to bring it down, and it just keeps bouncing back and forth. So that's usually a telltale sign your valve's oversized. I'm gonna tell you right now, all the valves are oversized. I know how Hill Phoenix they select them for worst case scenario, which you never see, and then there's safety factors involved in it. I mean, I used to work for them, so I know the drill. But all of them are oversized. We can fix that in the program. We have a parameter that's called max valve percentage, and I'll show you where it's at when we get into it. But you can actually set that down to 60%, 70%, 80%. So what it'll do is it'll keep that valve from going open the full time, and it'll actually allow it to control better.
Just like a multiplier.
Right. Yeah. It's basically a top end. So if you say I want to top out at 75%, then it'll never be open for the entire time frame. So the algorithm that it uses to control the temperature in the superheat is an adaptive algorithm. So it's kind of a learning algorithm, similar to enhanced suction, where it kind of learns the trends. This is doing the same thing. It has a learning algorithm. So what I've seen sometimes too is on walk-ins, they always leave the doors open. The walk-ins never make temperature during the day. So what I've seen happen occasionally is the algorithm learns that I cannot make temperature. So all I'm going to do is control the superheat because temperature is not obtainable. And so then at night, what happens is it kind of defaults to really more or less controlling superheat and maybe not controlling the temperature as much. So sometimes you may have to reset the device itself, and it'll start to relearn its algorithm. So if you get hung up in a position where it's like, man, this thing's just, it's not working right, sometimes just resetting that device, resetting that algorithm will kind of restart it. So, but usually if they've had restocking the case or something like that, I mean, usually that short of a time frame won't screw it up if it's been running pretty good for a while. But if you first turn the thing on and they're loading it up and it can't make temperature for a couple hours, what I would do is reset the device the next day or something when all that's kind of settled out, and then because you don't want those trends in the algorithm. So. One of the good things with the adaptive algorithm is you don't have to mess with P and ID settings. So all that stuff, I mean, those you can spend weeks chasing your tail with P and ID settings. This thing learns it learns itself, so you don't have to mess with those.
So we don't have to put the 0.5, 0.5.
Correct. Yeah, you don't have to mess with any of those.
So there's not going to be no throttle on these because it's all going to be controlled by superheat.
Right. Yeah, it's all part of this adaptive algorithm. So. And then this thing here, it kind of goes through all the steps of how to program one of these, and I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the stuff. But one of the things too is your firmware. If you have a legacy E2, you have to have at least 307 firmware in order for you to use the XM devices. On the E2E, the enhanced version, we brought it out in 406, and I put on here 406 FO2. You can actually use it with 406 FO1, but there were some issues with the device and the circuit not really syncing up in FO1. So if you might even want to check 1333. That was one of the first ones. And if you've got 406 FO1 firmware, I might bump it up. I think it might save yourself some issues. So. We hit the Modbus. Okay, so again, I would program the E2 when you get a new rack from Hill Phoenix on a new store. It's going to have it in there. I would still go through this checklist and make sure. And Hill Phoenix has got this, and they're supposed to be programming per this, but that don't always happen. If I were you guys, you get a new rack that's already got the program in it, I'd go through and double check to make sure they hit everything. And this sheet just kind of walks you through the steps of setting up the device, the circuit, and associating them. One thing too is the case lights. The schedule for case lights resides in the BX in most of your stores. The XM devices cannot read that schedule in BX. So if you try to go out and grab that schedule out of the BX through global data, you're not going to be able to do it. So what we do is we create a time schedule for the case lights in the E2, and then we point to that one. So if you have case control storage, you'll have a lighting schedule that resides in the E2 and the RX controller, the refrigeration controller. So, and it walks you through how to set it up. It's not real hard. It's got step-by-step procedures to do that. From what I've been told, the CCB and the CC100 were the same way. So, again, we have two different setups. We have the XM device and we have the XM circuit. So the XM device you can see one of two ways. Menu 5400 is one way of getting there. Menu 5 for configured applications, and then 400 is your XM device. And then that will bring you up with all the devices that you have in the store. Other way to do it is Alt-N for your network summary. It's a little bit different screen, but this will show you what's online. Now, if you have a bunch of boards, all your network devices will show up on this screen. So if I had 8RO boards, multiplex boards, other E2s that we were all talking to, all that would show up here, so you'd see it, everything. The menu 5400 will only show you the XM devices. So, but you can get to the status screen either way. So we'll go back to menu 5400, and then we'll go down to this is the status screen for the device itself. And of course, I don't have any. I don't have it online yet, or otherwise, we still wouldn't see anything because I don't have any temp sensors hooked up to it. But anyway, what we have is basically your temperature, all your defrost, and all your probe settings. Over here, it'll tell you where your valve percentage is, and also what your superheat is. So whenever you bring one of these online, first thing I would do is make sure that all these temperatures populate. So that's the most important piece and you know, once you see these temperatures starting to populate, then you know that the parameters in this device are correct. So we'll get through that part.
You shouldn't have to calibrate them on startup or ice water?
No, should not. I mean, that's a great test. Walmart makes you go through that. Publix probably should. It's a great test that everybody should do, but if they're not paying you to do it, there's no reason for you to do it. But you know, like so that's good practice. But
how often do the transducers go bad?
It's a standard CPC transducer.
So a lot.
So yeah, we like to sell transducers. Now I heard you guys. I don't know if specifically you guys, but Rick was telling me that you've been seeing some transducers fail recently. But if you can get those back to us whenever they fail, I know it's kind of a pain in the butt to call and get an RMA and send them back to us. But
What's
even
the warranty on them?
I think
minutes?
16 months, I believe. So. But if you can, when you have them fail, if you can get them back to us that way, because I got with our manufacturing support, which does our warranties and stuff, and they said nobody sent any of them back, so we've got nothing to go off of. So if they're failing and we don't get them back to test them, see what's wrong with them, we don't know there's a problem. So yes, sir, Pete.
I just need some clarity before we keep going, because we keep talking about case parameters and loading it from the E2 down.
Yes.
In the old school, you pulled up a pull down and you told it was a deli case, it was a frozen food, it was a dairy. Is it the same thing?
Yes.
You still do that, yes.
So in the E2, there's a menu to pull down. You tell it what it is and you send it down.
For the most part, it's a little more to it, and that's what that's what this sheet will kind of walk you through which parameters need to change. But that's in the XM circuit. We'll go into the XM circuit now.
The controllers, are they addressed? Are they hard addressed? Meaning they're dip switches, or how are they addressed?
No, we address them from here. Yeah.
Addressed through there.
Yeah, we address it from here,
So
and then we commission it in the E2 to bring it online.
So if you're commissioning a new store, you'd have to tell all the controllers what they are, number-wise.
Correct.
Then go to the rack, communicate, talk, and then download their parameters.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
if I was to stock these in stock, which are basically a generic controller, there's no way the parameters would have to be downloaded from the pull down to the E2.
Correct. Yeah. So, like I said, if you were to stock them.
Well, he's mentioning that the hot sticks, which if Adam asked about standalone, and sometimes we get a brand new case with a Dixell controller, and we have to standalone it for maybe 2 months.
Okay.
We would have to hot stick it from
Yes.
whatever it was, a deli case, whatever case, and then tell it what it is.
Right.
So you just couldn't you'd have to have 50 hot sticks in your truck for every case.
Well,
But we'd have to download it from an XM.
What I would do is, and what I've done for some of the facilities, Lakeland facilities, and I'm gonna get one from Miami too. 2 different hot sticks, one low temp, one medium temp. It's got just most all your parameters. I mean, I'd say set up for an ORZ frozen food case. I dump that into here, and then what I can do is, but I want to use it for ice cream. I take the frozen food program, I dump it in here, and then I can go through here and I can change the temperature for ice cream temp. So that puts of the 299 parameters that reside in here, it'll dump 295 of them that you need, and so then I only had to change 3 or 4 from here.
Okay.
So I can change my number of defrost, my duration, that stuff from that keypad itself if you're running a standalone mode.
Okay.
So yeah, that's if you're in that situation, the hotkey is going to be your best friend.
All right.
So if you can run it, if you're connected to the network, the way I would suggest doing it is following these guidelines, set up all your parameters, and then through the network you push all those parameters into here. So.
Are they going to be putting them in any self-contained cases?
At this point, no, not self-contained. So let's see. Let me go back into the device here real quick because I just want to show you guys where some of the stuff is.
Well, hopefully you don't go out. So fun to get to.
All right. So when you bring one of these online for the first time, let me get logged in here. Doesn't want to cooperate. It's a little slow through the 9 pins. I apologize. I'm typing faster than this thing is, which I know you dealt with that on 553. From what Steve told me, it was like 5 minutes behind. And I don't know why this thing's doing this to me.
That was our first CCB store.
Yeah, I think that's the first one that you guys did.
Yes, sir. That was the first one. That was cutting edge technology.
No more handheld.
Yeah, no more handhelds with these. So, yeah, the handheld actually resides on the device itself. The remote display is now your handheld. So
those will be visible for everybody to touch?
yes, they're in every box. So
Okay, on the box.
yeah.
On the front of the case, like
Okay.
Publix doesn't want it on front of the case. They don't want people knowing what the case temperature is. And the reason they give me is, well, we don't want them to know when it's in defrost. I'm like, well, we can set that up to whenever it goes into defrost, it shows you what the set point is. So they don't know that it's in defrost. They don't know that the case temperature is warming up because it's showing the set point. So they think that's what the temperature is. They still don't want them visible.
They just want to cover it up in the socket.
Yeah. So you know, to each his own.
Well, I think that should
Yeah,
go
we
in a
can
little box.
we can make it say whatever we want to during defrost. It can say DEF. It can
It's on the
like
lid.
that.
It's on the lid.
So, but that's their choice. They don't want it visible. So.
And then they're burying them in the sockets where you can see.
No, these are the ones that we have.
Okay. So if you are on a retrofit and your network's up and you're going to force these down into here, one of the major things, and this is probably the most important thing that I'm going to say today, is there's this parameter. I'm in the XM device and the setup. There's a parameter here, initial sync. It defaults to yes. And reason, well, let me go back. It defaults to yes. You want to change that to no. Initial sync has got to be at no. If that's to yes, what happens is when you first bring this online, all the parameters that reside in that device, it's going to dump into the E2. So you go through this E2 and you program all the XM circuit, the XM device, and then you load it up and you forgot that one parameter, all your work's for nothing. It's going to overwrite it all. And it's going to have all the settings in the E2 that were in the XM device that don't work. So then you got to reprogram the thing. So initial sync has to be at no. And then what that does is that will eliminate that feeding into here. So, and the reason it's set up that way is it's for a hotkey. So if you were to program this with a hotkey, you got your program in it, or you programmed it from the display, which I really wouldn't suggest trying to do. Then what happens is you've got everything loaded into the device, and then you bring it online, and it says, okay, here's everything I had. I wouldn't, even if you use a hotkey, I still wouldn't do that. There's too many parameters that reside in that device that you might have missed. So, like I said, I would, even if you program it from a hotkey, I still don't want those parameters being pushed into the E2. We want to take the E2 parameters and we want to push them into that device. So this other, right above it, config sync action, that is, it defaults to send the E2 configuration to the device. So what that does is twice a day, it just makes sure that the device and the E2 are on the same page, have the same parameters. Twice a day, it sends the E2's config down to the device. So, but the initial sync is for when you first power it up. So as long as you have that to know when you first power it up, nothing's going to happen.
Is that changeable to 4 or 6 times a day maybe instead of twice a day?
No. It's,
I mean, for the stores that lose power.
It should be in there. So really what that's for is if you were to make a change in the E2, and you didn't push the change down, it's going to catch that twice a day.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, and then, or if let's say somebody is monkeying around with this thing here, and they're changing stuff, they're changing the set point or something, well, twice a day when it goes through this, it's going to overwrite what was done there. So it just keeps the two the same. So, yes.
Actually, what if, say, the external battery dies and this resets? Will that automatically return to original programming? To yes?
Yes, because the program does not reside on the battery. The only thing the E2 battery holds is date and time. So, yeah, it is actually burned into the memory of the E2. So, show advanced is another parameter on here. Usually for a service guy, the show advanced is you can leave that to no. But if you're programming initially, there's a couple parameters that you're going to see. So what this does is if we have no, it hides a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, like I said, there's 300 parameters in this device, and most of them, I'm going to say 280 of them you don't even need to mess with.
So set it to no or set it to?
Well, it depends. So if you're doing if you're doing your programming, I would have it to yes. After that, it can be set to no. It's going to hide a bunch of stuff you don't need. But there are some things on the initial program that you'll need to see. So I would say yes, and it's not a big deal. If you set it to yes and you leave it there, you're just going to see a whole bunch more parameters. You're just going to see a lot more stuff. So, and most of this, like I said, we're in the XM device. It's got all the parameters in it. It's going to get a lot of this information from the XM circuit. So there's not a whole lot that we do in this device setup, because like I said, once we associate it to the XM circuit, it's going to fill in all this stuff for us. So I just want to hit the high points of what we need to look at changing. The valve tab, the refrigerant type. The refrigerant type is defaulted at 404A. I think we're all using 407A. You might have 404A on some of your remodels, but anyway, that has to be changed. So whenever you go and you set this device up, make sure you set your refrigerant type. And then this next one is Superheat Automatic. That's defaulted to yes. What that is, that enables the adaptive algorithm. You could turn that off, and then you could adjust all the PID settings. I wouldn't suggest it. I'd just leave it at yes. Another parameter that we talked about earlier, the max valve percentage. It's in this valve tab. Again, we're in the XM device in the setup C5 valve tab. Max valve percentage resides right there. So if your valve's oversized, I would even say you could probably just about start up every one of them at 80% and be fine. Just under most circumstances.
So that's what you recommend, 80%?
I don't want to, I mean, I'm just saying you could, I don't recommend that. It depends on what the case, what your caseload is, what the valve size they have in it.
How many times they open the door,
True.
Opening the doors and stuff like that wouldn't matter. I mean, I think you're telling us 80% is a good field adjustment, because any valve that's oversized, you're going to see it slamming shut, opening, slamming shut.
Yeah, open, closed, open.
And it's like adjusting superheat on the commissioning.
Right.
You might want to start all at 80, and if you see you're not meeting temp, you can go up to 90, and if you see you're meeting temp, you can knock it down to 70 or 75.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things that you just kind of, when you're tuning it up, now it'll still, if you leave that at 100 and you don't touch it, it's still going to run. It's still going to maintain your case temp. It's just not going to be running its optimal range. So, like I said, it'll still work at 100 if it's oversized. It's just not working optimally. So, what you'd want to do is graph your valve percentage, and you'd actually want to see the valve percentage, kind of like bouncing somewhere, 40, 50, 60%, something like that. If it's 0, 100, 0, 100, 0, 100, that's when you want to look at changing your max valve percentage. So. There's one more setting I want to show you guys here. And this, again, we're in the valve tab here. Okay, let me go back up. We have, this is Pressure Transducer Max and Min. So in the E2, we default to 0 and 200. We use 200-pound transducers. If you had to change a transducer, all you had on your truck was a 500-pound transducer, you can use it. You just got to come in here and you got to set that to 500 pounds for the scaling. But you can use it. That's where you'd set it. Again, it's in the valve tab. If you've got a system that's just not acting right, and it's just acting screwy and nothing's really working the way it should, one thing I would check, I would come into this tab and I'd look at these two parameters. And if you see -7 for the min and 160 for the max, then the parameters that were in this device when it shipped got put into your E2. That's a telltale sign, because what that thing, and it's set up for some funky transducer they use in Italy or something, hell, I don't know. But anyway, the default parameter in that device for Transducer Max Min, -7 and 160. If you see those values, what I would do is I'd delete this XM device and I'd go by this sheet here and re-add a new one in. That's the easiest way to get around it. But that's a telltale sign that you got the wrong parameters loaded into E2. And so what I've seen is that I've seen that happen a lot. I'm not sure what people are doing. Maybe they don't turn the initial sync off or something. But when they get those parameters loaded in here, and they'll go in and they'll start trying to tweak stuff. And it's like, oh, well, that doesn't look right. My transducer's off. And they'll go and they'll just change those two parameters. Well, they didn't fix the real problem. They're just fixing pieces of it because there's a lot of other parameters that are in here that are affecting that. So the best thing to do, delete the device, re-add it, follow these instructions. So. And that happens more times than you think. I was at a store in Lakeland Division. Every case in the store that had happened on, and they lost a lot of product. Contractor was overconfident and didn't need us. Said, "Oh, we got it. We don't need it. We don't need help." Well, after the installing contractor left the job and it was left in the hands of the servicing contractor, started having a lot of problems. They called us down to take a look. Steve Yates and I went down, and we found every case in the store had the parameters in there dumped into the E2, and we had to delete every XM device in the entire store and re-add them. It took between the two of us, it took us about 2.5 hours, and that was about probably 70 cases in the store. So it's not a massive undertaking if you have to do that, but that's the best way to do it. Delete the device and re-add it. So again, all these other parameters in here, the XM circuits are going to feed all this stuff in. But I wanted to show you guys one more spot. Okay, so we're in the More tab. Yes, sir.
Any of this on that hotkey that you're talking about?
Well, the hotkey. Remember, the hotkey comes blank. So if you get a brand new hotkey, it's not going to have anything on it.
Right. Once
So
it's programmed, it should have what you're talking about.
So you go to 553 and you say, I want an ORZ ice cream case, and you load it in here. It'll have it all on the hotkey at that point.
Gotcha.
So
once you have one store set up, you pretty much should have 2 of those keys.
yeah, or I mean, you may want to have one for all of them. I mean, or you may want to have a frozen food and ice cream. But the thing is, my thing is yeah, probably 2 keys are good, and then
4 keys better.
Yeah.
2 keys will get you out of trouble.
Yeah, 2 keys will get you out of trouble, and then you can adjust the other parameters you need from the keypad, and that's if you're in standalone mode. I can't stress enough having your network up. It's so much easier to do it through the E2. The E2 just, I mean, you guys are used to working on the E2. Nobody's really used to punching on this keypad. It's a pain in the butt. So that's why I stress having your network up beforehand so you can do it all through here. It just makes life easier. So.
Can you email the hotkey program?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the only way to have a hotkey. I mean, it's not an emailable program. It only goes on here. You got to have a device. You got to stick it in here, load it on the hotkey.
So that's
not from a computer. Yeah, the only way to read this hotkey is through one of those.
So how do you load it?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Is that a RS-485 key?
No, this is a specific key to Dixell. This is a specific. It will only fit about 3 different Dixell devices. It won't fit anything else. It won't plug into your computer. It's not a USB.
Okay.
So I mean, I'll pass it around. You guys can look. I mean, it's a 5-pin connector there.
So this would work for that little standalone controller too.
Is it the XR75?
Yeah.
Yes, it will work on an XR75. So again, I'm on I hit C0 for the More tab and the XM device setup, and we're going to go down here to E probe config. This is where we tell it what type of probes we've got. Now, the E2 by default is going to default every one of these probes to a CPC probe. 3 and 4 we don't use, so I set those to NP, which stands for no probe. If you had an off-cycle defrost case that didn't use a defrost termination, you'd also want to do the same thing to probe 2, defrost termination. So if I hit F4 lookup, NP's on the top. So I would set NP there. Actually, I want to change that one back though. Again, if you don't tell it no probe, it's gonna populate your alarm log with a bunch of probe errors. So I highly suggest going and putting those in. Again, by default, they'll all populate as CPC probes, so you have to change it to no probe. The transducer here on PB5, that's our suction transducer. 5VR is our 1 to 5 volt transducer. There's other options, 4 to 20 milliamp, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the CPC one that we use is the 5VR. So, all right. And then we'll go into circuits here real quick. So there's a specific circuit that works with the XM, because we have standard circuits, we have CC100 circuits, CCB circuits. We now have an XM circuit. The XM circuit this device is an XM679, so we call it an XM circuit. And if we go into the setup of those, the naming convention too. One thing I'll touch on. In firmware 2.8, we quit allowing the duplicate names. So it used to be in the CCBs, you'd name the device and the circuit the exact same thing. And that way you it's easier to marry them up. Well, it got to be confusing in the programming. Programming didn't know what was what when it saw the same name. So in firmware 2.8, they quit allowing us to name the same thing. So what we suggest with these XMs, the naming convention that Publix uses, which 1 would be your rack, 01 would be your position on the rack, and then I didn't put it in here, but let's say it was circuit 39, ORZ or frozen food, whatever. What we're suggesting is for the naming convention, the circuit, make it like 1-01, and then in the XM device, name it 1.01. Same thing, but the dot versus the dash changes the name up enough to where it'll allow it. And if you're upgrading firmware, let's say you have CCBs and you're on 2.7 firmware and you're adding some Dixells, so what?
Manual change.
No, so what'll happen is when you upgrade, you'll say you're at 2.7 and you upgrade to 3.06. When you do that upgrade, it's going to change those names for you. The names where you have duplicate names, it's actually the last couple of digits may get changed arbitrarily to 01 or 02 or something, but the firmware upgrade will change those names because, like I said, it no longer allows that to happen. So, okay, Pete, here's your spot right here, case type on the XM circuit. If you do not put a case type in here, you won't go into defrost. That's it's one of those things. It works that way with all of our circuits. If you don't put anything in that case type, it's not going to work. So, when you put in our case types from the drop-down menu, we've got default parameters in there. You can change those default parameters, but what I would suggest doing is changing that case type first. Because if you go and you put all your parameters in there and then you put a case type in, it's going to overwrite all the parameters you did. So the first thing you do is you put a case type in there. Doesn't have to be exactly what you have, but put something close. And then after you put the case type in, then you can change the parameters to whatever Hill Phoenix wants it to be. Because let's say you put reach in frozen food, we may default it at minus 9.4 degrees. Well, Hill Phoenix says no, we run it at minus 3 degrees or minus 4 degrees. So you can override it, the set points once you select that case type. The next thing too, fan mode. The fan mode tells you, what your fans are supposed to do during defrost and refrigeration. It does not get changed with case type. So if I select an ice cream case, it's not going to change that fan type. So you still have to change the fan type. For electric defrost, we want them on in refrigeration and off in defrost. Off cycle, we would change that to on during defrost. So it would be option 4, refrigeration continuous defrost on.
So if we wanted to jump, so we had to ice the case when we had the hot gas and we had to jump it out, we just turn the fans to on.
No,
We don't jump fans on.
No, but he will have to pull the ice cream first.
We don't jump fans on. What's wrong
Carolina, remember, we were sharing 13 guys in Carolina have to listen to that.
Lights during defrost, that defaults to off, which means whenever it goes in defrost, turns your lights off. There's a lot of customers that want the lights off in defrost. It tells the customer, hey, this is in defrost. Publix is not one of them. So anyway, so we have to manually change that from off to on. And then our Setpoint Stab. One thing on the Setpoint that we found, and you may get into some arguments with your coordinator on this, but let's say Hill Phoenix wants Hill Phoenix said this set point is -3, and you put -3 in here. What's going to happen is when it gets to -3 degrees, it's going to shut the valve off. So it doesn't really have like a dead band, set point dead band. When it gets to -3 degrees, it shuts that valve off, and then it may hit -1 before it starts bringing the temp back down. So your average temp is actually going to be -2. So if you change that to -4, which is 1 degree below what the case temp setting should be, it actually averages out to -3, because now it'll go -4, it'll come on, it'll shut off at -2, and your average case temp will be -3. So that's one of those things. I'm addressing it with all the Publix people so that they know that, because I know a lot of them are by the book. So no, Hill Phoenix says it's -3, it's got to be -3. Well, your end result's going to be about a degree average higher than what you want. So that's again one of the little idiosyncrasies. Dixell does a very good job of maintaining the case temp. I mean, it holds the dead band within about 2 degrees. I mean, sometimes I've even seen a little less than that, but it's pretty good about maintaining the case temp dead band. So.
Have you had a lot of experience with all the CCB cases that don't have pulse valves in them, frozen food, meat? What?
You mean where they cut the pulse valves out and put solenoids
expansion
in?
valves, and they're controlling by suction stop?
I've seen some of them. I don't have a lot of experience with them.
Well, usually we drove the CCB, the pulse valve set point down so it would override it. And we just maintain temperature by circuit pressure.
Right.
So with, I know 553 had expansion valves and frozen food.
Right.
What do they do? They drive the target temp below what it should be, so it stays open all the time and doesn't pulse?
Yeah, either that or you just.
Every CCB
yeah, I guess that would be the way.
Expansion valves and meat and frozen food.
Right. Yeah, same way in the Atlanta division. Well, most of the time too, whenever they're changing, like I think at 553 they put all the pulses in, so you went back to a pulse valve. So if you're saying if you took a Dixell case and you want to do the same, yeah, you do the same thing. Run that case temp down to keep it on all the time, and then that would work with this as well.
It turns into a controller that turns the lights on.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, basically. Okay, your defrost setup here. This is the same as all your other circuits for defrost. But there is this one added feature down here: standalone time. So the Dixell device itself does not have a clock. It does not know that, hey, it's Saturday at 2 in the morning and I go into defrost. That all resides in the E2. The E2 tells it, hey, it's Saturday, 2 a.m. going to defrost. The E2 is sending that signal down to the XM device. Now, if you're in standalone, what it has is a clock, or it has a timer in it. So it knows I go into defrost every 24 hours if it's once a day. If it has 4 defrosts a day, it's every 6 hours. So you have to set the standalone time to whatever that interval is. So if you need 4 defrosts a day, you change that to 8. And down here is also it tells you what it is: standalone defrost interval in hours. So So yeah, if I set that to 8, it's going to defrost every 8 hours. So that's how it works in standalone mode. And I believe that defaults at 4 defrosts a day, which is 6 hours. So if you have 3, you have to change it to 8. If you have 1, change it to 24. If you have 2, change it to 12. So it's however many hours between defrosts you want it to be. So
Linda, are we at a 5
sure,
minute break?
absolutely.